It's beginning to look a lot like spring around the country. The grass is greening up, cows are being turned out to pasture, and the fly season is just around the corner. Welcome to this edition of the Beef Roundtable. I'm Dr. Ron Lemonager, Beef Extension Specialist at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. The Beef Roundtable is recorded live and edited to fit the time constraints of the program. The programs are available at the Beef Magazine website, youtube.com, as well as www.beefroundtable.com.
And I'm Burt Rutherford, Senior Editor at Beef Magazine, and I'm in Amarillo, Texas. Our first guest for this Beef Roundtable is Dr. Lou Strickland. Lou's a graduate of the Auburn University College of Veterinary Medicine, and after graduation, Lou was in private practice in both Tennessee and Pennsylvania. After 7 years of large animal practice, Lou entered and completed an animal reproduction residency at Auburn University College of Veterinary Medicine, and he also received a Master's of Science degree in animal reproduction from Auburn. He's a diplomat in the American College of Theriogenologists. After completion of his residency, Lou served as the interim extension veterinarian for the state of Alabama. Lou then returned to private practice for 3 years. Currently, he's the extension veterinarian in the Department of Animal Science for the University of Tennessee. As the Tennessee Extension Veterinarian, Lou is responsible for providing animal health information to the folks in Tennessee who have farm animals and are needing some of that kind of help. He's also associated with the UT College of Veterinary Medicine's Center for Agriculture and Food Security and Preparedness. And as part of the Office of Laboratory Care at UT, Lou is responsible for the oversight of the health and well-being of the farm animals at the UT Agricultural and Stations Research and Extension Centers across the state.
Our second guest is Dr. Jason Banta. He is an associate professor and extension beef specialist at Texas A&M University. He got his BS degree from Texas A&M in 1999, his master's from West Texas A&M in 2002, and his PhD in animal nutrition at Oklahoma State University in 2005. As an extension beef specialist, Dr. Banta works with county extension educators and allied industry personnel to develop educational programming for cow-calf and stocker operations in East and Northeast Texas. Dr. Banta also works with other AgriLife and A&M faculty to conduct beef research in the areas of ruminant nutrition, cow-calf and stocker management, and animal health. Additionally, he also coordinates and teaches a special topics course in applied beef cattle nutrition in the College of Veterinary Medicine.
Lou and Jason, let's begin our discussion by talking a little bit about what types of flies producers need to be concerned about.
The biggest concern that I have, and I see this in producers in Tennessee here, is horn flies and also face flies. Those are the biggest concern. Just with those horn flies that have those blood meals, biting those animals 20 to 30 times a day or more, and then also the face flies that are a big concern with spreading pink eye. Those are more of flies that are found around the face of the cow, around their eyes, feeding around their eyes and their nose, and they certainly can pick up strains of pink eye and carry that from one cow to another.
And for us in Texas, as well as a large portion of the southern states, horn flies are going to be our primary pest as well. I guess the change would be with the secondary fly species there. We actually see more problems with stable flies than we do with either house or face flies. And so those are the two we focus our management programs on.
Now, each one of these flies that has been mentioned affect animal behavior and performance differently. Let's begin with the biting, blood-sucking horn fly, and in the case of, in some areas of the country, the stable fly. What can we expect with those?
Okay, and so when we look at the horn fly, obviously that's a big irritation to the cattle, and when those flies get severe enough, the cattle spend more time uh, switching tails and trying to get some relief from the flies, and you'll actually see some reduction in performance, both from a reduction in intake, but probably a bigger loss is that blood sucking and the removal of nutrients through the blood supply in those cattle, and you'll you'll see those. The big sign of the horn flies is just a switching of the tails of those cattle out in the pasture. In contrast, what we typically see in the early to mid part of the spring when we talk about stable flies is if we ever see cattle in a big bunch, a big tight circle in the middle of the pasture, that's usually a pretty good indication with stable flies. Those flies will bite the legs of those cattle and they will tend to work the outside of the herd. So to try to get some relief, those cows will move towards the middle, and that's what creates that tight circle of cattle out in the pasture.
Another concern that I typically have, and I push this pretty hard with my producers about changing needles because I'm big on transfer of disease. But there is a potential, especially with the stable flies and with the horn flies that are taking a blood meal. There's a potential that anaplasmosis or BLV can be passed from one animal to the next, especially if you've got that reservoir out there in the field, that asymptomatic carrier out there in the field with those animals, and it only takes about 5/1000ths of a mil of blood to spread from one animal to the next. So that is that potential there that disease can be spread by these flies as well.
Lou, would you expect the stable fly to be more of a problem because of its life cycle, and it basically leaves the animal, where the horn fly tends to stay a little bit closer to the same animal, and then so would the stable fly be more of a problem in terms of disease transmission than the horn fly, or not?
Certainly can be if they're carrying that big blood meal, and also those tabanid flies carrying big blood meals, or as some people call them, horse flies. They carry that big blood meal, and there certainly could be more of a potential there. So that's why I'm always working with my producers, emphasizing fly control, especially from a biosecurity issue of not spreading disease from one animal to the next.
What about
Maybe to add,
I'm sorry, Ron, go ahead.
I was just going to say we talked about the reduction in performance and the disease transmission concerns. Just to try to put a few numbers on that, when we look at a reduction on horn flies from an average daily gain standpoint, when we talk about those stocker cattle or those replacement heifers, average across a large number of studies would show a potential 0.2 of a day loss in performance. So basically every 5 days, we're losing a pound of potential weight gain in those cattle if we don't control the flies. In nursing calves, we're typically looking at on average about 0.09 to a tenth of a pound a day. So roughly every 10 days, we're giving up a potential pound of gain. So disease issues and the performance issues definitely suggest it's worth managing these flies.
Okay. What about the non-biting flies? Face fly and the house fly. Do they create any problems for cattle producers?
By all means, we've already, as you mentioned there, we talked about the biting flies, but the face flies, the Musca autumnalis, they do not have biting mouth parts. They've got sponging mouth parts, and they can travel cow to cow. And when they're feeding on those secretions from the eye, they can certainly irritate that eye and then set that eye up for a infection with pink eye. Usually the cornea does a great job keeping the outside world where it's supposed to be until it gets irritated. So if that cow has their head down in tall seed heads, extra dusty conditions, that cornea gets damaged, flies come along, they've got the Moraxella bovis or Moraxella bovaculi bacteria on their legs and the feeding mouth parts, and then they'll spread that disease from one cow to the next, and then gets in that defect in the cornea, sets up housekeeping, and that's when that inflamed eye and that infection sets up in that eye. And also the the feeding on the eye from those sponging mouth parts, that can cause enough irritation in the eye to set up a pink eye situation as well.
So
And I guess the other place
go ahead.
go ahead,
No,
Ron.
go.
I was just going to say the other place we think about stable and houseflies is around those 4-H and FFA youth projects and barns and stables, and so we need to be aware of them in those environments as well.
A little harder to control in those environments. So let's now talk a little bit about how do we control these fly populations, and what are kind of the pros and the cons of those different methods.
When we think about control of fly species, I guess there's 3 different methods we can use to control those flies. One of those being biological control, which examples of that would be things like parasitic wasps and dung beetles. We have cultural control, meaning we're managing that environment to reduce those breeding sites for those flies. And then the one that we're probably most common and we spend the most time with is insecticide control. And there's a lot of different application methods we can use for that, whether that be an ear tag, whether that be a dust, a back rub, a pour-on. There's even a gel cap applicator device that some people use, especially in very extensive range types environments. But there's a lot of options, and producers just want to pick the one that best suits their style of management.
Lou, what are you seeing in Tennessee?
We see the same type thing. Usually, what as Dr. Banna seeing there in Texas, we'll have producers that, producers that are trying different styles of control. I get those questions all the time. I just have recently sent out a newsletter to all my producers here in the state on different methods of fly control, and the biggest point that I try to get across to them is it's not a magic bullet deal. It is a management issue. I typically will start this time of year with insect growth regulators. I'll try to get these producers to start feeding them now, even though I've had calls from producers that tell me we're already seeing flies, we're having troubles already. But I'll try to get them to get an IGR out early in the year and feed those throughout the season. Then some pour-ons for their back rubs, especially around water troughs, mineral feeders, those type things, to where they've got to go through that back rub to get to that water or the mineral feeder. Then maybe some spray applications. I constantly get the questions about the gel cap gun, and does that work? How does that fit in? Some producers are using it and they like it, and some have told me that just really doesn't fit their style. And then I try to get, when there's heavy infestation, about roughly 200 flies on the animal, then I'll try to get them to put the ear tags in then. I usually will have trouble with producers that they're eager. They want to get those fly tags in now, and I'm trying to tell them, no, let's wait just a little bit, because the chemical is going to run out. It's going to leach out too soon in that ear tag, and then if that chemical is down below a certain level, it's causing resistance. So, and typically that's the management protocol that I try to get out to all my producers.
Both of you mentioned the gel caps. Basically you're applying insecticide remotely, if you will, okay, from a distance. Do you think that changes the animal's behavior in that operation when they do that? It's going to sting them just a little bit. Are you getting any reports back on, how that affects animal handling and behavior, down the road in other production management scenarios where you're trying to work the cattle? Any reaction to that?
Yes, I've had some of my producers that have used that said, well, not a problem. We've not had an issue. But I've also had other producers tell me their cows are literally getting gun shy. That they're seeing a reaction from their cattle, where these cattle they're scattering when they see them coming. One other thing that I often wonder about, because you're also talking to the BQA coordinator for the state of Tennessee right now, I wonder about bruising underneath the skin. I know I've been told by the company not a problem, but I've not seen any slaughterhouse results from that yet. So that question's in the back of my mind. I don't have anything to back that up, but that question is there in the back of my
I had a
mind.
producer the other day that said that, you know, they were using them, and every time they pull into the pasture with a four-wheeler, okay, the cattle react to the four-wheeler, okay, just like, you know, they were going to get insecticide applied, you know, using the gel caps. So, and that was kind of in a negative sort of way. So, I mean, I think producers need to be aware that that could be a potential problem, and make adjustments accordingly.
Absolutely, I would agree. And to add to Dr. Strickland's comment from a BQA standpoint, the other thing I worry about is sometimes producers get in a hurry and we have cattle in a bunch. And if you miss one and accidentally catch another one in an eye or somewhere, then you have some additional challenges. So if they are going to use that application, they need to think about the behavioral long-term considerations as well as any potential accidental strikes in areas of the body where we don't want that gel cap applicator.
You know, a lot of times it just seems like we're battling flies all summer long, and you say to yourself, well, I killed them once. Why do they keep coming back? What's the life cycle of these pests, and how does that affect your management?
Well, these producers really have to be on the ball to stay on top of a life cycle, because a life cycle can be as short as 21 days on these insects. They reproduce rapidly. And another management issue I try to get across is manure management, especially in congregated areas. And I know that's tough. A 1,200-pound cow is putting out about 75 pounds manure a day. So that can get tough when you've got a lot of animals, especially if they're congregating around feed troughs, under a shade tree, those type things. So manure management is big in control of flies as well. And of course, bundled together with that short life cycle. And that of course, just keep coming right back.
Is there talking about the different species of flies? What are some of the different life cycles that we're dealing with?
Go ahead, Lou.
Okay, these life cycles, as I mentioned, they're pretty rapid, and one thing that I like to get across is the IGRs. Some of these flies, especially the horn flies, they will lay their larvae in fresh manure. So the IGR is not a chemical or an insecticide, as you say. So I always tell the producers it does not keep that insect off the cow. But what it does, it sterilizes the larva that's been laid in the manure, so they're incapable of reproducing. So it cuts down on the population. And also another little, this may seem awfully simplistic, but a 16-year-old kid riding a four-wheeler out in the pasture with a chain link fence tied behind it, and spreading the manure out to where it dries. And then if that fly does not have fresh manure to lay the larva in, then it has nowhere to go. So just manure management and being able to interrupt that fly life cycle.
Now,
And I guess one thing I talk to producers about, because sometimes we forget, is these different products we use, what part of that life cycle are they focusing on? So our topical products obviously are going to focus on that adult fly, and we're going to control that. Whereas the IGRs that Dr. Strickland mentioned are going to work on the larva. And so sometimes we have some producers who get a little disappointed if they just go with the IGR, especially later in the season, because they're expecting it to kill the adult fly, and that's not what it's meant to do. And so just realize what product we're dealing with, what part of that life cycle does it focus on.
that kind of brings us kind of to the next topic. Then I think is resistance, to some of the products that we use. Do we see a resistance to the IGR formulation, or do we see a resistance to the insecticides that we might use as impregnated in an ear tag or in a dust bag, or, talk about the resistance issue.
Resistance issue is a huge concern. I think we probably spend the most time thinking about that when we talk about horn flies. When we're looking at our topical products, what I typically recommend to people is we need to rotate those products. And generally speaking, we want to rotate to a new product every year. The one exception with that is we will use organophosphates 2 years in a row before we'll rotate to a pyrethroid. Basically, when we look at chemical classes from a topical standpoint, we would have our traditional pyrethroids, our organophosphates, abamectin. There's some topical products there, mainly just one ear tag, but any of our pour-on dewormers would kind of fall into that category, and we can get some horn fly control from those products. And then the newest chemical class on the market is Pyrazole, and we'll see what products we have available for that as we move forward. But generally, we want to look at rotating those on a yearly basis. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're using ear tags as well as a pour-on product or a back rubber, is to use the same chemical class across all those products. So don't use an organophosphate ear tag and then a pyrethroid pour-on, because that really limits our ability to rotate as we move down the road. I guess when we look at the IGRs, I'm not aware of any reports on resistance of horn flies and IGRs. That's definitely a potential. I am aware of some reports in mosquitoes where they saw some resistance there. I'd be curious to hear Dr. Strickland's thoughts on that.
I've not heard that report. Usually what I tell my producers is because this is aiming more at sterilizing the fly, keeping that fly from reproducing, we're not seeing so much of a resistance issue with those.
And I guess we're not recommending the rotation of those either. That's something we're going to incorporate in the program yearly. Just realize there's always a potential, but we haven't seen any reports to this point in time.
So, any last comments, okay, that are points that really need to be the take-home message for our producers in terms of fly control and reducing the economic and production losses that take place?
The biggest drive home point that I try to get across to my producers, and I'm sure this is the same everywhere, we've all got that mentality of we want a one shot and done type of management issue, but this is one of those. This is not a one shot and done. It is a multifaceted management program. We've got to consider manure management. We've got to consider the life cycle of that fly and how short it is and how to interrupt that life cycle. Paying attention to getting started early in the season, being on top of it with IGRs, also the pour-ons, then the fly tags later in the season, removing those fly tags at the end of the season, not leaving those fly tags in too long. I don't know how many times, Dr. Banner's probably seen this too, how many times I've been out to work cows and those old faded fly tags are still in their ears. Drives me up the wall, but just get those out in a timely manner, and then just paying attention. And I realize it's a full-time job. It's not just we've done this one thing and then we're finished. And as Dr. Banner said, not swapping classes of chemicals within the same year. That is exactly how we cause resistance.
Absolutely. I guess to add to that, and we've both made this point, but just to reiterate, is no single approach is going to give you the best success. You're going to have the best success with continued topical applications as well as the use of a feed additive or something like that. And so that dual approach is going to give us the most benefit. Another thing, we've been seeing more problems with stable flies the last several springs in Texas and Louisiana and some of the other states down here. One option that has helped some people is if they're dealing with grasshoppers in the springtime and they're spraying little grasshoppers, there is a product called Dimlin 2L, which contains diflubenzuron, which is actually an IGR that we use for fly control, but it's labeled to spray on pastures. And so we have seen some good luck in the spring. If we're already intending to spray grasshoppers, by using that product, we can get some suppression of stable and horn flies as well. Not recommending to go out there to spray just for the flies, but if you're already spraying for grasshoppers, we have seen some definite benefits on that, on the stable and the horn flies. Then also have had some people had success when we get into the spring, if they have any piles of hay left over, either go in there and get those spread out or go in there and spot treat those with a product like the Dimlin or something with an IGR in it.
Let me ask another question. I think you raised a couple of really good points, and I had a producer that was using one of the pour-on anthelmintics, okay, for internal parasites, okay, but he was using it in between treating for internal parasites as a fly control at about a half rate. Comment on using a half rate in between dewormings, if you will, using some of those products that are really internal parasite control versus external.
Yes, you can see some results from doing that, but my biggest concern there is either using a half dose or some of the generic dewormers as a fly control measure. Now, most likely you're causing internal parasite resistance. So that is my biggest concern when producers talk with me about that and wanting recommendations on using those. So I usually caution them. Can't stop them, but I usually caution them that there is certainly a potential for that train wreck as well.
I agree 100%. What we try to talk to producers about is not using those pour-on dewormers as a primary fly control tool, but where they can be nice is, for us, we typically will deworm in November, December, and we still have some flies there, and so it works good to eliminate some of those potentially resistant flies we built up. But we're using it for a deworming purpose and just have the side benefit of the fly control there. I guess one thing we have seen from a field observation standpoint is Dr. Strickland mentioned the generics and some of the concerns and problems we've seen with those. Is we've actually seen some producers who have started to have cattle grub problems again, or which would be related back to hill flies from some failures of some of the generic dewormer products. So that's something to be aware of as well.
Excellent. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Beef Roundtable. Bert and I would like to thank our guests, Dr. Lou Strickland and Dr. Jason Bana, for their insight into the fly season and how we need to plan our fly control program to improve both animal performance, well-being, and the economics of all of that. Please join us again next month for another Beef Roundtable discussion. It's going to be a great program. Until next time, Bert and I hope you have a safe and rewarding month.